My name is Ivy Andrews. I'm 35 years old, an Army JAG major, and I came home from a 7-month deployment in Germany 3 weeks ago. The first thing I did was check the closet for a cedar box. I knew my mother would leave my daughter out on Christmas Eve. I just didn't know it would take an 8-year-old and that wooden box to make her lose control. My daughter is Maya. Eli and I brought her home from foster care when she was 8 months old. She's 8 years old now. For all 8 of those years, my mother has privately called her not really family. For all 8 of those years, the rest of my family stayed silent. What none of them knew was that my dad, gone for 2.5 years, spent his last summer preparing something only I had the key to. He told me exactly when to use it while we sat on the dock at the lake cabin. 43 minutes after we sat down for Christmas dinner, my 8-year-old slid that cedar box across the table and said the line we had practiced. Welcome back to Calm Drama Stories. If you've ever watched a family member act like a child doesn't exist, while everyone else stays quiet, you'll understand every part of this story. Drop a comment with one word that describes how that silence feels. And make sure you're subscribed, because what happens at this Christmas table leaves marks that paperwork takes a long time to fix. The plane landed at Minneapolis-St. Paul on a Sunday afternoon, the runway covered with light November snow. I had my duffel bag, my Pelican case, and a folder I hadn't opened in 2.5 years. Eli was waiting at arrivals with Maya on his shoulders, both wearing matching gray beanies. She slid down his back and wrapped both arms around my waist before I could even put my case down. She smelled like apple shampoo and the inside of our minivan. "You're heavier," I said into her hair. "You're taller," she answered. Eli kissed me, grabbed the duffel, and we stepped out into the cold. On the drive home to Stillwater, Maya pulled something from under her jacket. Walter's silver dog tag, the dented one from his Vietnam tour. She had been wearing it under her hoodie ever since the funeral. "I kept him with me," she said. "I know, baby." Eli looked at me in the rearview mirror. We didn't say it out loud in front of her. We didn't need to. The holiday season was already marked on the kitchen calendar, and Christmas Eve was circled in red, 3 weeks away. At home, after Maya went to bed, I walked to the hall closet and opened the door. The cedar box sat on the top shelf where Eli had moved it from storage. Walter's handwriting was still tied to the latch on a small brass tag. For Maya, when the time comes. I ran my hand over the leather strap. 3 weeks until Christmas Eve. 3 weeks until the trust paperwork could legally move. I closed the closet door. "You okay?" Eli asked from the hallway. "Yeah," I said, "we're ready." The group text arrived on a Tuesday morning while I was making pancakes for Maya. It was from my mother. Subject line, "Christmas Eve dinner, bringing presents." "Christmas dinner at my place," the message read. "Bringing presents for the kids. Sophie and Jackson get something special. Maya's welcome too, of course." I read it twice, then I read it again. The words, "of course," sat in the middle of the message like a stone dropped into clean water. Maya climbed onto the counter stool beside me and read it over my shoulder. She didn't say anything. She just leaned her head against my arm and went back to eating pancakes. Eli sat at the dining table, going through old work emails. He looked up. "What was it?" I turned the phone toward him. He read the message once, then again. Then he stood up, walked into his office, returned with a thick black 3-ring binder, and opened it on the kitchen counter. "Folder number 47, he said quietly. The binder was organized by date. Photos, screenshots, printed emails, voicemail transcripts. 8 years of them. Holiday after holiday. Birthday after birthday. Voicemails from Aunt Linda. Forwarded messages from Heather. Patricia's loud Christmas card lists with Maya's name written smaller at the bottom like an afterthought. He slid the new text into the next plastic sleeve, added the timestamp, and closed the binder. 47, he repeated. "I'll be home all month," I said. "We have the cabin paperwork. We have Dad's letter. We have his attorney's number. We just need her there." "She'll be there," Eli replied, "and so will we." Maya finished her pancakes and climbed down to feed the dog. After she left for school, Eli and I sat at the kitchen table with the binder open between us. I hadn't seen most of it. A lot happened while I was overseas. Some of it I witnessed myself. Most of it Eli handled alone. Page 1, a photo from Maya's first birthday party. Eli holding her in his lap. Patricia standing in the background, clearly avoiding both of them. A gift card in her hand for Sophie. Forgot Maya's gift this year, Eli had written underneath. Said it would be confusing to give different things. Page 8. An email Heather accidentally CC'd to Eli in 2019. The phrase, "your little project," referred to Maya. The rest of the message talked about gluten-free cupcakes. Page 16. A voicemail transcript from Aunt Linda. Pat, do we really have to invite the adopted one for Easter? My back isn't what it used to be. Patricia never corrected her. She simply replied, "Just for an hour, Linda." Page 23. Patricia's Christmas card from 2021. 3 names handwritten in red ink. Sophie, Jackson, Ivy, no Maya, no Eli. The envelope said, "To our beloved grandchildren." Page 41, a screenshot from last Christmas. Patricia handing Maya a $5 Starbucks gift card while the other 2 children opened a Lego set and a charm bracelet. I gently closed the binder and rested my hand on top of it. "Walter saw all of this," I said. "He saw it before we did," Eli answered. "That's why we have a plan." He nodded once. Nothing else needed to be said. That Sunday night, I tucked Maya into bed. Walter's dog tag was wrapped twice around her small wrist. "Mom," she asked, "will Grandma read Grandpa's letter this Christmas?" I sat on the edge of the bed. I had been waiting for that question. Eli and I had practiced the answer over and over, but none of those rehearsed words felt right when I looked at her face. "Maybe she will," I said softly. "Maybe she won't. What if she doesn't? Then I'll read it out loud for her in front of everyone." Maya thought about that while the bedside lamp cast little triangles of yellow across her blanket. "Either way," I told her, "you're the one who hands her the box. That's your part. Grandpa wanted you to give it to her, not me, not Dad." "Why me?" "Because he said you were brave enough." "What if I'm scared?" "You can still be brave while scared, baby. Brave doesn't mean not feeling fear. It means feeling it and walking to the table anyway." She looked down at the dog tag, turning the dented edge upward. "Grandpa got scared too, right?" "Plenty of times." "Okay," she whispered. I leaned down and brushed the hair from her forehead. Then I said the same thing I'd told her every night since she was 3 years old. "I see you, Maya. Grandpa saw you too." She smiled that small, careful smile she'd carried since toddlerhood, closed her hand around the dog tag, and turned toward the wall. I switched off the lamp. Then I stood in the doorway for a long time before finally going downstairs. Christmas Eve morning arrived with snow before sunrise. By 8 o'clock, the driveway needed shoveling, and the world outside looked like a holiday postcard, nothing like the inside of my mother's house. I laid my dress uniform across the bed. Service blues, ribbons polished, name tape on the right side, Andrews. Patricia had insisted on a yearly uniform photo for the family album ever since I became captain. She never displayed any of them. I stopped asking. I still wore the uniform because Walter liked it, and because today it mattered. In the mirror, I tucked Walter's silver dog tag inside the collar. The dented edge rested warm against my skin. I buttoned the collar shut. Maya walked in wearing the red velvet dress Eli bought her, white tights, and little black Mary Janes. Her hair was braided into 2 French braids. Walter's old watch sat on her wrist, still set to the wrong time because she preferred it that way. "You look like a mom from a Christmas movie," she said. "You look like you," I answered. Eli stood in the doorway in a suit and tie, smiling quietly. "Cedar box already in the car under Maya's seat," he said. He kissed Maya's forehead, then mine. "Drive there, eat dinner, stay calm. Maya gives her the box when dessert's on the table, then we leave when we leave." "Copy that." Maya, raised around Army routines, gave us both a tiny salute before heading downstairs to put on her coat. Stillwater in December looks like a town built for Hallmark cards. Brick storefronts, white lights wrapped around lampposts, the river frozen along the edges. My mother's house sat 4 blocks from Main Street. A 2-story Victorian with a wraparound porch she had repainted 3 separate times since Walter died. Each time in a color he hated. The driveway was already packed when we arrived. Heather's SUV, David's truck, Aunt Linda's old Buick with the rosary hanging from the mirror. The porch light glowed above a fresh balsam wreath tied with gold ribbon and a brass bell that rang when the front door opened. Eli parked behind Aunt Linda's Buick. I sat quietly in the passenger seat for a moment. Maya held the cedar box on her lap with both hands resting on the lid. "We okay?" Eli asked. We're okay. We stepped out into the cold. Maya carried the cedar box carefully, the same way Walter taught her to carry covered dishes. Eli held the front door open. The bell rang as we entered. Patricia met us in the foyer. She hugged Heather first, even though Heather had already been there for hours. She kissed Sophie's hair. She patted Jackson on the head. Then she turned to me with a tight smile that never reached her eyes. "Ivy, you look thin." "Hi, Mom." Then she looked past Maya. Past her completely, like she was a coat hung on the wrong hook. "Oh," she said. "You brought her." "Of course." Maya didn't react. She had heard it before. She placed the cedar box beside her boots. "Come in," Patricia said. "We're already having cookies." The kitchen smelled like butter, cloves, and Patricia's yearly pavlova recipe, made because Aunt Linda complimented it once back in 1996. Sophie and Jackson sat at the counter eating cookies. Patricia had prepared 3 small plates with names written on them. There was no plate for Maya. Without a word, Eli took a 4th plate from the cabinet and set it beside mine. Then he placed 2 cookies on it and nodded toward Maya. She climbed onto the stool between us. I leaned in the doorway, pretending to study the ornaments hanging over the kitchen window. From there, I could hear Patricia and Aunt Linda near the stove. "Pat," Aunt Linda said quietly, "you don't need to make a fuss over Maya. She's not really family. You said that yourself." Patricia gave a soft laugh. "Well, Linda, you said it. I'm only repeating it." Heather walked by with a casserole dish and didn't react at all. The kitchen was small enough that everyone heard it. Eli's jaw tightened, but he stayed silent. He picked up the cookie plate and carried it back to Maya. My chest went completely still, the same way it does before a deposition. For 8 years, I had seen versions of this through screenshots, binders, awkward birthday parties, and forwarded messages. But this was the first time I heard it spoken out loud while my daughter stood 12 feet away. Maya stared out the window at the snow. She heard every word. I could tell from the set of her jaw. Still, she said nothing. She bit the edges off her gingerbread cookie first, exactly the way Walter taught her. I waited. We had a plan. Patricia called everyone to dinner at 6:30. The dining room looked exactly the way Walter used to arrange it before he died. Green and gold runner. 12 place settings. Candles in the holders. Walter made himself back in 1987. Patricia seated Sophie on her right and Jackson on her left. Aunt Linda beside Sophie, Heather and David across from them. At the far end near the wall sat 2 empty chairs and 1 folding chair placed beside a child's card table with a paper Santa plate and a juice box. Maya looked at the card table. Then she looked at me. Eli was already moving. He picked up the folding chair, carried it across the room, and placed it between our seats. Then he brought over the paper plate and juice box too. He pushed the chair in gently for Maya. "Maya sits with us, Pat," he said warmly, professionally, the same tone he uses with permit clerks. Always has. Patricia's lips tightened. Aunt Linda raised her eyebrows. Heather stared into her wine glass. Patricia opened her mouth, closed it again, then forced a bright smile. More room for the pavlova. "Heather, dear, could you grab the rolls?" Maya sat between us. Eli unfolded her napkin into her lap. The cedar box rested beneath her chair, her boots touching the leather strap. She never looked up. The candles burned steadily. The wood stove crackled softly. Dinner began, and dinner unfolded the way it always did. Aunt Linda repeated the story about the 1987 ice storm. David talked sports. Heather asked me 3 polite questions about Germany, none about Maya. Patricia complimented her own brisket twice. Maya ate quietly, only speaking when someone addressed her directly. She drank water in careful little sips and kept 1 foot resting on the cedar box beneath her chair, just the way I taught her. After the dishes were cleared but before dessert arrived, Patricia clapped her hands together and announced, "Time for presents." The gifts were wrapped in matching gold paper with red ribbon. 2 large boxes sat under the tree, and 1 small flat package rested on the side table. Patricia picked up the big ones first. She handed Sophie a flat rectangular box, about 2 pounds, with the unmistakable weight of a tablet inside. "For my smart girl," Patricia said. "Open it." Sophie tore through the wrapping paper. An iPad Pro, the newest model, around $1,200 retail. Sophie made the excited sound only a 10-year-old can make and lifted it over her head. David clapped twice. Then Patricia handed Jackson a square box. And for my little engineer. Jackson opened it. A Nintendo Switch OLED. He shouted. Sophie shouted. Heather laughed. Patricia walked back to the side table and picked up the final item, a small flat envelope. She walked over to Maya, sitting between Eli and me, and handed it to her with both hands like it was some kind of ceremony. Here you go, sweetheart. Merry Christmas. Maya opened it. Inside was a drugstore Christmas card with a printed snowman on the front. No money, no handwritten note, just the card. Sophie looked up from her new iPad. Mom, where's Maya's iPad? Patricia answered quickly. Sophie, hush, we have rules. The rules were never written down. No one had officially explained them except the 4 adults in the room who had silently agreed to them since 2017. Patricia walked back to the tree and returned with a small velvet ring box. She knelt beside Sophie's chair and opened it so everyone at the table could see. A gold chain, a heart-shaped pendant, an engraved letter S on the front, an antique piece that once belonged to Grandma Jones, the same necklace Patricia had kept locked in a safe deposit box for 19 years. This belonged to Grandma Jones, sweetie, Patricia said, for my real granddaughter. The word real landed heavily across the table. Sophie blinked. She understood the word mattered, even if she didn't fully understand why. She let Patricia clasp the necklace around her neck and touch the pendant gently. Aunt Linda nodded in approval. Joan would have wanted that. She always cared about keeping heirlooms in the family. Maya stared down at her hands in her lap. Eli's grip tightened around his napkin. I kept my face completely still. I had practiced that expression in mirrors since I was 7 years old. Under my service blues, I could feel Walter's dog tag resting against my collarbone. I focused on the dented edge against my skin and took one slow breath, the way I learned at OCS before difficult calls. David coughed and looked down into his wine glass. Like always, he said nothing. Patricia stood up looking satisfied with herself and walked back toward the tree. One more, she announced. Very quietly, Maya spoke. Mom, may I go to the bathroom? Yes, baby, I answered. Come right back. She slid off the chair, leaving the cedar box beneath it. And while Maya was gone, Patricia pulled out the final gift, a small white envelope. She handed it to Jackson. For your savings account, my smart little man, from Grandma and Aunt Linda. Jackson opened it. 5 crisp $100 bills straight from the bank. Whoa. He looked at the money, then at his mother. Heather smiled widely. Say thank you, Jack. Thank you, Grandma. Thank you, Aunt Linda. Aunt Linda laughed. Don't spend it all on candy. He'll spend it on Pokemon, David said. It was the most he had spoken all evening. The fire in the wood stove cracked sharply as a log shifted. The room smelled like cedar smoke and burnt brown sugar drifting in from the kitchen. Heather poured herself another glass of wine. Patricia did the same. Their glasses clinked once. Blood comes first, Aunt Linda said. She didn't direct it at anyone specifically, which meant she directed it at everyone. That's just how life works. Maya came back from the bathroom quietly and climbed into her chair between Eli and me. She folded her hands in her lap and looked at the cookies on her plate. Patricia did not hand her another envelope. Under the table, Eli squeezed my knee once. Steady. Long. Not yet. I didn't react. I lifted my water glass, took a sip, and set it back down. I cut into a piece of brisket I had no intention of eating and moved it around my plate. Maya looked at me, then at Eli, then at the cedar box under her chair, then at the dessert that still hadn't been brought out. Mom, she asked softly, is it almost time? Soon, I answered. Sophie was still touching the gold pendant around her neck, turning the engraved S with her thumb. Sophie was thoughtful. I had always liked Sophie, partly because she didn't understand the rules either. Mom, she asked, Maya didn't get one. Why didn't Maya get one? Heather spoke sharply. Sophie, eat your pie. But she's our cousin. She's adopted. Sophie, eat your pie. The word adopted came out of Heather's mouth like a stain dropped onto clean fabric, like she was explaining something about a stranger instead of a child sitting at the same table. I watched Maya carefully. She didn't look up. She stared at the candle flame in front of her as it leaned slightly left, then right, then settled again. David coughed once more and took a drink from his beer without looking at his wife. Patricia closed her eyes briefly, just for a second. I noticed. Then she opened them and lifted her wine glass again. Sophie set her fork down untouched. That's not what cousins are, she said quietly. Heather sighed. Sophie, we are not discussing this right now. What conversation? Sophie turned toward Maya. I'm sorry, Maya. Maya looked up and gave her small, careful smile. It's okay, Sophie. No, Sophie replied softly, it's not. She said it while staring down at her plate. The room became very still. Eli's hand tightened once against my knee. Hold. We were close now. Dessert was almost on the table. 3 more minutes. I lifted my water glass again and took another sip while watching my daughter. She was ready. While Heather corrected Sophie and Patricia pretended not to hear, my mind drifted back to the lake cabin. Summer of 2023. The last summer my father was alive, even though most of us didn't know it yet. Walter knew. It was a Tuesday in late July. Eli and Maya were inside the cabin making blueberry pancakes while I sat with Dad on the dock. He wore his faded blue work shirt with the sleeves rolled above his elbows. His forearms were sunburned the way only a carpenter's arms get sunburned. He handed me a manila folder. On the label, in his handwriting, Holland Family Trust, irrevocable. What's this? I asked. A private trust, he said. I had George Wheeler draft it, a state attorney out of Duluth. Your mother doesn't know him. He's my attorney. Dad, why? He stared out across the lake and let his fishing line drift farther out before answering. Ivy, I'm not going to have many summers left. My heart's failing. Congestive. Doctor confirmed it. I straightened immediately. Dad, I haven't told your mother, and I'm not going to. She'd make it about herself. Dad, don't listen to me. I see how your mother treats Maya. I have eyes, 8 years of eyes. He looked directly at me. The day you brought Maya home, your mother said in this kitchen that Maya wasn't her real grandchild. I never forgot it. I haven't forgotten a single thing she said about that little girl. I held the folder tightly in my lap without opening it. The lake cabin is in the trust now, he continued. The beneficiary is Maya Rose Andrews. There's also a separate account at Park State Bank. Around $80,000 in savings bonds, plus whatever comes from selling my tools. It transfers when Maya turns 8. Dad, Ivy, listen carefully. She is my granddaughter in every way that matters. I will not let your mother leave her with nothing. Not while I'm alive and not after I'm gone. Then he handed me a second envelope. Cream-colored paper. His handwriting. Sealed with a wax stamp he made himself using melted candle wax and an old brass button from his workshop. To be opened by Patricia in front of family. When Maya is ready. I built the box yesterday, he told me. Cedar wood. It's in the workshop. Maya helped sand the lid. She doesn't know what's inside. She only knows it belongs to her. My thoughts returned to the dining room table, the candles, the empty Hallmark card, my daughter's hand wrapped around her water glass. I knew exactly what I was going to do. I want to pause here for a second. I'm sitting at a dinner table where my mother handed my daughter an empty Christmas card while my niece unwraps a $1,000 iPad. And I'm about to tell you what happened over the next 43 minutes, because that's how long it took for my 8-year-old to slide a cedar box across that table. If you've ever sat through a moment like this, comment the word witness below. I'm reading every comment. I excused myself from the table and knelt beside Maya's chair. I placed my hand over hers. I see you, Maya. You know what to do. She nodded. When dessert is on the table, Mom. When dessert is on the table. You're going to read Grandpa's letter if Grandma won't. I'm going to read Grandpa's letter if Grandma won't. Okay. I touched one of her braids, stood up, and returned to my seat. Patricia watched me with that flat, polite expression she uses whenever she disapproves of something but doesn't want to create a scene. Everything okay? Ivy? Everything's fine, Mom. You spoil her, you know. All that military life and traveling, she doesn't even sit still anymore. I didn't respond. I picked up my water glass again. Under the table, Maya reached down and wrapped her hand around the leather strap of the cedar box. She didn't lift it. She simply held the strap the way someone holds a leash before standing up to walk a dog. The leather near the buckle was worn from years of use. Walter used to hook the box onto his belt while carrying it from the workshop to the porch. Maya remembered that mark. She had sat on his lap the day he sanded the lids smooth. She asked him what was inside. He told her, "Something you may hand your grandma someday, sweetheart." "What if I don't want to?" she asked him. "Then you don't have to," he answered. "But it's yours when you're ready." Heather carried the apple pie into the dining room on a glass stand and placed it in the center of the table beside two pie servers and a small pitcher of cream. Aunt Linda cut the first slice for Patricia, but Patricia waved her off and stood up instead. She tapped her wine glass lightly with a butter knife. The room quieted. "I just want to say something before we start dessert," Patricia announced. She looked around the table, smiled at Sophie, smiled at Jackson, then smiled vaguely past Maya. "Family is everything," she said. "Walter, rest his soul, used to say that all the time. Family is blood. That's what he believed." She raised her glass slightly. "Sophie and Jackson, you are my heart. You always will be. And in this family, we don't do half measures. We give what we can to the children we have." David shifted uncomfortably in his chair and stared at his plate. Heather's cheeks had gone pink from wine. I placed my hand over Maya's. Quietly, Eli pulled out his phone beneath the table, opened the voice memo app, and pressed record. He placed the phone face down beside his plate with the microphone pointed toward Patricia. He had already told me he planned to do it. And I had told him to. "Walter always said family was blood," Patricia repeated. "I think about that every Christmas." Then she lifted her glass. "To the kids." Heather raised hers. Aunt Linda raised hers. David slowly raised his. I did not lift mine. Neither did Eli. Neither did Maya. She looked down at her folded hands. Patricia drank and sat back down, looking pleased with herself. Pie began moving around the table. Heather served Sophie. Aunt Linda served Jackson. Heather served David. David served Heather. Patricia served herself. No one served Maya. Without saying a word, Eli stood up, walked to the buffet behind us, grabbed a clean plate, cut a slice of pie for Maya, added a spoonful of cream because he knew she liked it, and placed it carefully in front of her. Patricia watched the entire thing in silence. "And speaking of family," Patricia continued casually while lifting her wine glass again, "Heather, I've been thinking about the lake cabin next summer. The Airbnb has become such a nice little business. I think we should repair the dock this year. Maybe even screen in the porch. Guests keep mentioning mosquitoes in the reviews." Heather brightened immediately. "Oh, Mom, that's a great idea. We could do it Memorial Day weekend." "Maybe," Patricia replied. "We made almost $4,000 last August alone. Imagine what a screened porch would do." Under the table, Eli's hand found my knee again and squeezed gently. Patricia sat there comfortably discussing profits from my father's lake cabin. She had no idea that for the last 2.5 years, the cabin had never legally belonged to her. She was earning money from property she did not own, and she was discussing it directly in front of the 8-year-old who did. Eli looked at me. I looked at Maya. Maya looked at the cedar box. The pie had been served. It was time. I gave her the smallest nod. Maya set down her fork and wiped her mouth with her napkin, the way Eli taught her. She folded the napkin once and placed it neatly beside her plate. Then she slid down from the folding chair. She reached beneath it and lifted the cedar box with both hands. It was heavier than she remembered. She pressed it carefully against her chest as the leather strap hung loose. Then she started walking. The long way around the dining table, past Heather, past David, past Aunt Linda. The wooden floor creaked beneath her Mary Janes. Heather looked up. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. "Maya," Heather said, "what are you doing, sweetie?" Maya didn't answer. She walked past Heather and Aunt Linda. She stopped at the head of the table where Patricia sat with her wine, pie, and satisfied smile. Carefully, Maya placed the cedar box on the table in front of Patricia. She pushed it forward the last few inches until the edge touched Patricia's plate. Her hand stayed on the box for a second before she stepped back. Then she stood with her hands at her sides the way Walter had taught her, chin slightly raised, quiet and steady. The room went silent except for the crackle from the wood stove. Maya spoke in a calm, clear voice. "Grandma, Mom told me to give this to you if you ignored me again." Patricia stared at the box, then at Maya, then at me. Aunt Linda let out a nervous laugh. "Is this some kind of joke?" It wasn't. Patricia's voice dropped low. "What is this?" Maya didn't answer. She had already said what she practiced for 3 weeks. Nothing more. She remained standing beside the table, shoulders straight, chin up. Aunt Linda laughed again, though it sounded forced now. "Pat, what is this? Was this planned?" Heather looked uneasy. "Mom, what's in the box?" David finally spoke. "Pat, what's going on?" Sophie placed her iPad face down on her napkin and leaned forward. Jackson stayed focused on his Switch. Patricia's eyes moved to the brass tag tied to the latch. For Maya when the time comes. Walter's handwriting. I watched the recognition spread across Patricia's face. The color drained from her cheeks. Ivy? She whispered. What is this? It's for you, I said calmly. From Maya. Open it, Patricia. I didn't call her mom that time, and I wouldn't again that night. Her hand shook slightly as she touched the latch. The brass clicked softly. Pat, you don't need to open that, Aunt Linda said quickly. Linda, I said evenly, be quiet. She stared at me. I had never spoken to her like that before. Patricia opened the box. The cedar scent filled the room instantly. Walter had coated it 3 times with linseed oil from his workshop, and Patricia recognized it immediately. Inside were 3 items, carefully arranged. On top sat a manila folder labeled in Walter's handwriting. Hollins Family Trust, irrevocable, executed June 14th, 2023. Under it was another folder, beneficiary Maya Rose Andrews. Beneath that rested a cream envelope sealed with wax Walter had made himself from a brass button, and tucked into the lid was a photograph. Walter sat on the dock at the lake cabin wearing his blue work shirt with rolled sleeves. 2-year-old Maya sat on his lap, smiling with her hand on his beard. Patricia saw the photograph first. She inhaled sharply. Her hand hovered over it but never touched it. Walter? She asked quietly. Yes, I replied. For a moment her expression shifted, not anger, something closer to confusion, maybe realization. Then the walls came back up. She grabbed the first folder and opened it. 18 pages. She read the opening section, then the second page. When she reached the page listing the lake cabin under trust property, she stopped breathing for a second. This isn't real, Patricia said. It's real. This isn't legal. It is. This is some kind of joke. Walter would never. He did. Look at the signature. She turned to the final page. Walter's signature, George Whelan's notarization stamp. Witness signatures from the paralegal and Walter's old shop foreman. Her hand slowly covered her mouth. He never told me. No, I said. He didn't. She kept reading. Lake Cabin, 360 acres in Pine County, transferred into the Hollins Family Trust on June 14th, 2023. Beneficiary, Maya Rose Andrews. Trustee until age 25, Ivy Andrews. Then she reached the financial pages. Trust value, $58,400. You knew? She asked. Yes. You knew while I was renting the cabin? Yes. You watched me all this time? He gave me the folder on the dock 2.5 years ago. Patricia lowered the trust papers and picked up the cream envelope. To be opened by Patricia in front of family when Maya is ready. Aunt Linda leaned forward nervously. Pat, don't. Patricia ignored her. Her hands trembled as she broke the wax seal and unfolded the letter. Walter's handwriting filled both sides of the page. She read silently. Her lips moved slightly as her eyes scanned downward. Then her face turned completely white. Finally, she folded the paper and slipped it back into the envelope. I can't read this aloud, she whispered. Read it, Mom. Ivy, please. He wrote it for you to read to the family. Patricia started crying quietly, not dramatic tears, just silent shame. I stood up and walked around the table. I gently took the letter from her hand. Then I unfolded it. I recognized my father's handwriting immediately. The narrow T's, the slanted Y's. I had never read the letter before. He told me what it said, but he never let me open it. I read it in the same measured voice I used in legal briefings. Patricia, I'm writing this in July of 2023. The summer I learned my heart is failing. For 40 years, you have measured people the wrong way. By blood, by names, by old family rules instead of actions, love, and loyalty. The room stayed silent. I have forgiven many things during our marriage. I forgave how you treated Ivy when she enlisted. I forgave how you treated Linda's first husband. I forgave how you treated my mother. I paused briefly, but I cannot forgive how you treated our granddaughter, Maya. No one moved. From the day Ivy and Eli brought her home, you decided she was not family. I heard you say it in our kitchen when you thought I wasn't listening. Aunt Linda covered her mouth. You ignored her birthdays. You ignored her christening. You sent Sophia savings bonds and Maya coloring books. David slowly lowered his beer bottle. I waited 2 years hoping you would change. I showed you photos of her over and over again. I no longer believe you will. I turned the page. So I did what I should have done years ago. I placed the lake cabin into a trust for Maya. I placed my retirement bonds into the trust for Maya. I placed the proceeds from my tools into the trust for Maya. The trust is irrevocable. It cannot be undone. I looked up briefly before continuing. She is my granddaughter in every way that matters. The sentence hung in the air. If you are reading this, Patricia, then you failed her again. You ignored her on a day that mattered. Now she has a home no one can take away from her, and it is not the home you plan to profit from. I folded the letter carefully and placed it beside the cedar box. For a long moment, nobody spoke. Then Aunt Linda finally whispered, "Pat, he didn't mean that." "He meant every word," I said calmly. Patricia picked up the trust folder again and flipped to the audit clause. It required repayment of all income collected from trust property after June 14th, 2023. Patricia had rented out the cabin as a vacation property for nearly 2 years. She had collected roughly $96,000. With interest, the amount came to around $103,000. She reread the clause twice. Then she stood so fast the chair scraped the floor hard. Her wine glass cracked in her hand. "He gave her the cabin?" she whispered. Then louder, "He gave her the cabin?" Aunt Linda rushed in nervously. "Pat, we'll fix this. We'll call a lawyer." "She's not really family," Linda blurted out. The words landed heavily across the room, but this time everyone heard them. Sophie covered her mouth. David stared at his wife. Heather looked frozen. Patricia turned slowly toward Linda. "Linda," she said quietly, "shut up." Linda immediately sat down. I didn't react. I simply looked at Maya. She still stood beside Patricia's chair exactly as Walter taught her. Calm, steady, unmoving. "Maya," I said softly, "come sit with me." She walked back around the table while the floor creaked beneath her shoes. This time, nobody looked away from her. Heather watched every step. For the first time in years, something in Heather's expression shifted. Regret? Maybe. She looked at Sophie, then finally at Maya. Really looked at her. Maya gave the same small, polite smile she had offered earlier after receiving the empty card. Heather didn't apologize. She lowered her eyes to her pie instead. The moment passed quietly. Maya sat between Eli and me. Eli rested a hand on her shoulder. Then I stood again. The fire crackled softly. Snow drifted outside the dining room window. "Patricia," I said evenly, "let me explain clearly." I spoke the way I had been trained to speak in court. Calm, precise. The Hollins Family Trust was executed June 14th, 2023 by attorney George Whelan of Whelan & Sons in Duluth, Minnesota. Patricia opened her mouth. "I'm not finished. Listen." She stayed silent. "The sole beneficiary is Maya Rose Andrews. I remain trustee until Maya turns 25. I continued through every detail. The lake cabin, the savings bonds, the tool sale proceeds, the transfer date, then the audit. You collected rental income from property you no longer owned. Patricia made a quiet sound. The audit begins January 7th. Certified notice will arrive next week. The room remained still. "I'm not asking for the money back," I said. "The trust is." Patricia stood again, shaking now. "You knew the entire time?" "Yes." "You watched me?" "I watched you choose." Her breathing became uneven. "You let your own mother steal from a child." "No, I let you decide who you wanted to be." She covered her face and cried openly now. Not anger, grief. Maya watched her carefully, not afraid, not satisfied, just understanding. I knelt beside Maya and adjusted her braid. "Grandpa saw me too," she whispered. "Yes, sweetheart, he did." Eli helped Maya into her coat. He picked up the cedar box and folded Walter's letter into his jacket pocket. Then I turned back toward the table one last time. The cabin will be returned to the Andrews family by July 1st. The audit begins January 7th. Patricia didn't answer. "Linda, don't contact us." She nodded silently. "Heather, when Sophie is older, she can decide for herself if she wants a relationship with Maya." Heather nodded with tears in her eyes. Sophie cried quietly into her napkin. David simply nodded once. We walked toward the front door together. Cold air rushed inside as Eli opened it. Outside, snow covered the driveway. We got into the SUV and drove away. Maya sat in the back seat holding the cedar box on her lap. None of us spoke for several minutes. Finally, Maya asked quietly, "Will Grandma write back?" "Probably not." "Okay." A little later, she asked, "Can I bring Tessa to the cabin next summer?" I laughed for the first time in weeks. "Yes," I said. "You can invite anyone you want. It's your cabin." She thought about that, then smiled softly. "It's our cabin." "Yes," I told her. "It is." She rested her cheek against the cedar box and fell asleep before we reached the highway. By March, the audit was complete. Patricia repaid the trust. Heather later sent me a short email. "I'm sorry, I didn't see her sooner." I never replied. Sophie mailed Maya a handmade Easter card a few weeks later. Maya answered kindly. The cedar box now sits on our mantle. Walter's silver dog tag rests on top of it. Maya is 9 now. The cabin opens again in May. She has already invited Tessa, Sophie, and her friend Andre. Eli spends weekends repairing the dock. Last month, I was selected for promotion to Lieutenant Colonel. Our next assignment is the Pentagon, but we're keeping the house in Stillwater because Maya wants to keep it. And after everything, I finally understand what my father tried to teach me. Family is not defined by blood. It's the chair you continue setting at the table, even when others pretend it doesn't belong there. That's the story. A cedar box, a grandfather who paid attention, and an 8-year-old girl who understood exactly what to do. If this story meant something to you, share it with someone who may need it. Leave a comment, subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.